One of the things that benefits California is obviously they have a lot of biomass, but what we our first 6 years, we're looking at 1,500 tons a day facilities that we're going to produce a lot. Actually, we can convert the hydrogen, the carbon dioxide to fuels, to renewable fuels. But as we ran that model, we just noticed that more of the trends were in more local economies, more local grids, smaller grids, and things like that. But most importantly, whether it be RINs or carbon intensity score, those are critical to getting the green rating, and that is the future. Eventually, virtually all hydrogen is expected to be green, so we want to get there right away. And every single thing that produces carbon in the process, including trucks and things like that, bringing the material to the facility. If you have a large facility, that 1,500 ton of facility we are looking at, one was in Georgia and one was in Thailand, and the radius around them of 70 trucks a day coming as much as 50, from far away as 50 miles. That was just killing our carbon intensity score. So the small facilities locally, the hydrogen is a lot easier to move than that much biomass every day. So hydrogen only has to be picked up a couple times a week from our facility. And the people like Airgas and Air Liquide already have customers for hydrogen, transportation, and Shell and a number of other companies are already looking very seriously at creating hydrogen transportation and storage infrastructure. They look at that as a robust part of the market. So what they'll see as they see facilities that can produce hydrogen come online, they'll build the storage and transportation infrastructure, because all the technology to do it exists. It's just a matter of ordering the trucks or the tanks or the compressors and the various things that are needed for it. That's so. I hope that partially answers your question anyway.
Yeah, I think I agree with Rob, and really, I think I would classify it into two different categories. So there are financial barriers, and then there are also technical barriers. To set up hydrogen plants, I mean, we did an economic analysis of setting up hydrogen plants with different feedstocks, and also whether or not you integrate carbon capture and storage with that. So for forest biomass, if you have feedstock coming out of the forest, you need somewhere between 100 and 120 million dollars in terms of capital cost. Also, I think getting reliable long-term feedstock contracts are also challenging in the state of California. But then also there are transportation related. We know that we have a significant demand of hydrogen in the state through these refineries, and a lot of them are interested in getting green hydrogen from producers. Then I think what we also figured out was that in our economic analysis is that forest residues are the least competitive when you compare it with municipal solid waste and ag residues. And there are a number of factors why forest residues are not competitive, primarily because of higher cost of feedstock, but also the lower carbon intensity scores that MSW benefits from. So there are a number of barriers, but broadly we can classify them into either technical barriers or financial barriers that also include market barriers.
I agree.
Nick, I see your hand raised.
Thank you. These were great presentations. Just one question back to Robert in terms of what are some of the barriers with respect to local permitting or getting sufficient feedstock, and where you may be trying to line that up, whether from private or public lands, especially with respect to forest management?
Initially, well, you gave us the harder question at the end. Initially, why we're going with at least looking to go to agricultural biomass is because it's a more uniform delivery and predictable delivery, and to get finance, we need 10-year contracts with 5-year renewables, and because we need 40 tons, 350 days a year, and 40 dry tons, and the system and it can't come up short. So walnut shells are the path of least resistance as a feedstock. because they shell them 10 months a year. They harvest them in 2 months, but they shell them for 10 months a year. So we have that feedstock all year round as storage for a buffer for 2 months. But once again, we have the algorithms already set up for other types of more complex feedstocks, like agricultural waste that's only harvested 2 months a year, and then the waste is around. So how to store it and things like that. Those things would apply very much towards woody biomass, forest biomass. So as far as being able to store it effectively and have it ready for us, but forest biomass would come out a little more consistently year round than say typical fall harvested crops that are growing the rest of the year. The walnuts and nutshells in general are a different thing. So that's why we went with that. But the forest biomass, we've been talking extensively with Butte Fire and Jim Houtman. They're the ones who suffered the Paradise Fire and things the year before last, and they've been working on it and putting a lot of effort into it, working with Sierra Pacific to get some numbers of what it would cost to go out and cull forests, depending on where it is. That can get up to $75 a ton, but we can look at, if we work with the state of California, we can probably absorb that. So at the far end, right now we're looking at $75 a ton to get it. But once again, putting our small facilities in as close to the source of the material and between agricultural biomass and forest biomass, we're talking about enough tonnage. If it was all new fuels doing it, which it obviously won't be, there will be plenty of competition at some point. We're talking a couple thousand facilities producing 13 to 1,500 kilos of hydrogen a day. So if it was all gasified with using our method, those facilities would get very close to the materials. Moving the hydrogen is the easy part, because once again, there's already infrastructure existing. All you have to do is expand on it, So I hope that answers your question. But the woody biomass is a bit of more of a problem, because there really isn't much of an infrastructure in place to go deep into the forest to cull out forest, and so we will start lining up facilities to do in those areas when we see when they see I think it works from two ends: the forest culling and us kind of working towards the middle and figuring out how it gets compatible.
Interesting. It sounds like both an enabling policy environment needs to exist for the woody biomass to be a critical source for near term, but also with a lot of the things that are moving right now at the state and with the federal increasing investment around infrastructure and support for forest restoration at scale, perhaps that will increase the pace at which those become feasible.
Real quick, I forgot to answer one question on the permitting side. We've already gone to GoBiz and shown them all of our exhaust numbers in detail. They were actually excited. Once again, there's really not much of a problem on what comes out of our system in a negative way at all. And Bill Carrier Farms took our design and all of our statistical data to the permitters, and they said there just isn't anything here that is an issue from an air quality or impact. Once again, they're 2-acre size facilities and things like that. They're not really tall. They're not noisy. They're not unsafe. So they're clean enough to be put next to a food facility, and let me put it that way, which is very, very highly regulated in California.
Thank you, Robert. Tim, I see your hand raised. Go ahead and jump in.
Hi, Tim Olson, California.
Hey, Tim.
Hey, Bob, how's it going?
Good.
Good characterization of the overall project. Both Harris and you did a really good job describing the landscape. Just for everybody here, my agency has released a solicitation. I talked to Bob and his team in advance to potentially co-fund these kinds of projects, and so we're looking forward to you participating in that. I wanted to ask, it's hard for many people to understand the low carbon fuel standard and carbon intensity, and maybe between you and Harris, regarding, because the focus of this is forest systems, forest waste in this case. What kind of work have you done related to the carbon intensity analysis? And this is kind of this is an area that needs a lot more work. And the way I would characterize it is, we have to have a better understanding of the fate of the forest before something happens to it, as a way to quantify the carbon intensity. And meaning the fate of the forest. What happens to the forest if nothing happens, like extracting waste residue would be one thing, or a wildfire. And when you could advance that and measure that in a better way, it appears to me that you'll get a lower carbon intensity score, which means a greater amount of money flowing into the revenue to offset the cost. And I guess, so that's a question. What have you done there? What do you learn in that area? And then just an overall comment about extracting forest waste out of the environment. I'm concluding that it'll take some kind of incentive to do that. That right now there's no incentive to extract that waste, and that's a big part of the cost is moving that or processing it.
That's one of the reasons. A good question. One of the reasons that Cal Fire is looking at it, or not Cal Fire, but Butte Fire Council is looking at us, and they've been looking at us for about 7 months now. Is because we can actually have we can offset some of that budget for going in and culling forest, to make forest fire safe, more fire safe. It's taking some of the trees out and then managing it. It's done. It does a tremendous job. When it's done and someone has the budget for it, it really does remediate forest fire issues a lot. So that's why I say, being localized, we can put them and hopefully afford to offset some of the easy stuff to get. We can actually pay for and cover the cost of. But the harder stuff, that's where the state's going to have to come in and help some, but not as much if we're already paying for a base amount for it. So it certainly takes care of some of that, the burden on the taxpayer.
Also, a little bit of landscape setting. What we found in our work is, if you look at a given amount of waste residue and you could process it to produce electricity, and compared that to processing it to produce a transportation fuel, the low carbon fuel standard on average gives you 4 times more revenue than if you produce electricity. Now you can configure hybrid, and I suspect with hydrogen, and you get into the negative numbers, I could be closer to 10 times greater revenue.
The only problem with that, even with 10 times, is that by the time you're taking your total syngas down by 40%, extracting the hydrogen, so you now have less material to work with, and fuel cells are pretty efficient, but at the same time, producing electricity from fuel cells from hydrogen produced from us, we're talking about in the near $1 a kilowatt, and so there would have to be a lot of credits to bring that down. But if for emergency situations, backup situations in remote areas and things like that, that's realistic. That's the kind of thing, that's the kind of dollars they pay, because they're bringing diesel fuel from way out into those areas. So it competes on that level, and it's much safer. But once again, electricity is not really, and also electricity, if you're not using a fuel cell to make the electricity, if you're using a diesel, which there are diesels that do hydrogen now, and they do it cleanly, but it affects your carbon intensity score in a negative way. We're really about getting that carbon intensity score deep into the negative numbers.
Yeah, I don't know if you have a comment about my original question there.
We did a full test with the people in Houston, the people who are the number one in RINs, when we were going to do fuels, and they ran ours with all the data. They ran our thing, and we qualify for D7 RINs, which is pretty astounding. It was a nice surprise, and they're the best RINs because of how clean we were. So if we took the Fischer trope off the back of it, not making fuels anymore, it's even cleaner, and extracting the hydrogen. It's all about the it's all about that remaining CO. If we sell it into commercial situations, then that'll be the final thing that really pushes our carbon intensity score way down. But other than that, and carbon monoxide can be mitigated as well fairly cleanly, but it's an extra cost, but not a great one. But we expect our carbon intensity scores. We're probably within a matter of 3 or 4 weeks by putting up the numbers, because we have the walnut shells in Europe right now, getting them tested to get the gigajoules and the specific numbers off it. So we'll have hard data numbers to submit to California.
Yeah, I just wanted to go back to Tim's question about the work we have done on carbon intensity scores. So myself and Dan at UC Berkeley, we have looked at different feedstocks coming into a facility and converting that feedstock into hydrogen and gasoline. So we designed different process configurations. So there are about 12 process configurations based on 3 different types of feedstock. We had municipal solid waste, forest residues, and ag residues. So these are 3 different feedstock and 2 different types of fuels that were coming out of this process. So what we, initially we calculated the CI score for each of the fuel type based on the inputs, and what we figured out was that the CI score for MSW was really low, and that's because MSW was benefiting greatly from the avoided emissions. So as you know, when trash decomposes, it emits CO2, and a lot of it can be captured, and you can utilize that CO2. You can utilize that CO2 in other and get like negative emissions. So what we figured out was that in terms of the CI scores for forest biomass hydrogen with CCS, it was about negative 127 grams of CO2 equivalent per megajoule compared to negative 330 for MSW. So there was a significant difference, and that is really impacting the economics of the operations.
And can you describe what those numbers might translate to in terms of dollars per gallon of, say, diesel fuel? Do you have that off the top of your head?
I don't have it off the top of my head, but happy to share those results with you after the call.
What I do know in renewable natural gas is a negative 325 is equivalent to about a little over $10 per gallon diesel gallon equivalent revenue. So the point of your project is if you have high cost, you could offset that with high revenues because of the carbon intensity, the extreme negative carbon intensity.
Absolutely.
In the financial markets right now, they will take into account things that they look at as a government subsidy, and so they will finance, but they'll pretty much cut in half what they expect your income to come from that. Because you might have it for a few years, and then a different administration comes in, does things like RINs took it in 2017. The RINs went down because Trump took refining facilities that are below a certain size and eliminated them from having to buy RINs, and the price took a dump. And so those are, and that doesn't help with the financial markets when things like that happen, because for 15 straight years they were working fine.
That's because no long-term contracts for those.
Right. Exactly. But once again, they do know they're realistic, and that now that the environmental issues are now firmly in place as opposed to 15 or 20 years ago, they're more financeable than they were in the past. Most definitely.
Very good. Good project.
TL Jim Boyd, can I ask a question?
Sure thing.
A question of you, Robert, and I'm a former California Energy Commissioner, as Tim knows too well. He was my advisor, and I'm now working with Tahoe Fund on, of course, saving the forest from fire, making it healthy, and trying to find some products. we've heard a lot of the barriers that we frankly have been facing for decades: transportation costs, the pure economics of the situation, and a pretty much an inability to get much in the way of subsidies. But you're building, and not long-term contracts in the forest is a big problem, as many people know. I'm fascinated with the fact you're working with Butte on a forest project. Do you have a long enough term supply, i.e. through contracts or what have you, to justify the economics for your financiers to build your facilities?
That has been the obstacle I've tried to explain to them, and with some difficulty, because once again, it's that uniform aspect of what our system demands. It's, for us to have the cash register ring, it starts with the biomass being delivered every day, and a buffer amount being there just to be on the days that it's interrupted. So yes, forest biomass is the most complex of the ones. The forest slash is a different story. The timber industry loves us to take that, and we'll buy it from them and things like that. But it is a great question. The forest thing still needs to be worked out. I think it's a triangular effort between government, the local people who are in the forest, where fire is a big issue, and the whoever is remediating that forest waste and attempting to offset the costs, or at least a large portion of the cost of pulling that material out of the forest.
So we all continue to face the same hurdles.
But I think taking it down a bit, able to taking it down a significant amount is a big part of the issue. And might help a lot. But once again, it's really getting that. I don't think it's as much a financial problem yet anymore, from what I've been viewing. We're having worked with Butte, as just making sure that the collection methods and the culling methods and things like that can show the financial markets that they're linear. They can be done in a linear way.
Well, good luck, because I'm just fearful we're going to burn more forest down before these hurdles get dealt with.
Jim Houtman's doing his best to make sure it happens sooner than later, so I have to give him a lot of credit for that.
The simple question for you, Harris, way back on your chart of where there were reservoirs available in California, are those deep saline water reservoirs or other types of geologic reservoirs?
Let me just go back to my slide here.
Jim, while Harris goes, why do you ask what would be the difference between the two types of water in service of hydrogen?
Well, this is a place to store. One place to store CO2 is in non-usable water, deep, and often that's very deep. So saline water is, and when I was leading carbon capture and sequestration efforts, that was the most positive potential reservoirs for CO2. These look like natural gas, maybe depleted natural gas reservoirs or something, but maybe. Thus my question of Harris.
Yeah, much of it is like the oil fields, natural gas fields, but then also sedimentary basins, across the Central Valley of California.
A big concern of the public is that they be leak proof, and that's always been a difficult thing to convince people that they weren't. Saline water or natural gas was easier to sell, but never easy, just because, it's been there for thousands or tens of thousands or millions of years. It looks like a pretty safe reservoir. Oil fields have never been looked at very positively by folks. But that's just a policy comment from past experience.
Well, policy comments from past experiences are critical to future potentials, so thank you for that. And Jim Houtman, I was going to ask you if you might elaborate on some of the thoughts that you were sharing in the chat, and then I saw you raised your hand as well, so perfect timing.
Sure. So one of the things that no one really figures in is how many thousands of acres get burned every year, what the economic cost is for that for a community. That includes both the rebuilding and the loss of life that happens, and then the money spent in fighting the fire. And then the health risk that happens with all the smoke that goes on. No one really ever puts a dollar amount on any of these conversations. Additionally, with that, one of the things that we look at here in Butte County, you talking about feedstock earlier, we've developed a map of what our feedstock availability could be. So there's about 120,000 acres in Butte County that's owned by what I call mom and pop landowners. They own an acre, they own 50 acres, they own 10 acres. It's a combination of those things, all above 1,500 feet with less than 40-degree slopes, so mechanized equipment can get in and remove material, do forest thinning on those properties. There's also about 100,000 of federal and state lands, another 100,000 acres of commercial timberland that's owned by timber companies. All of those have potential feedstocks. And, when you look at one of these facilities, it's maybe 2,300 acres to feed one of these. So in Butte County alone, we could put 100 of these facilities up and have feedstock for a very long time. And that's kind of what we're looking at is how do we help the private landowner thin their properties? We get phone calls all the day. We get CCI grants from CAL FIRE to do, roadside fuel reduction. And we show up to do the work, and the property owner says, well, I thought you were going to clean all my property. And it's like, well, we're going to do 100 feet along the road. And really what we need to be able to do is be able to help all those landowners thin those thousands of acres that they have.
You're getting there.
Thank you, Jim. I have a couple kindergarten questions, which one of them is that Sheldon Kimber from Intersect Power, there's a recent article, said, as solar and wind are now the lowest cost forms of energy on Earth, we have to find ways to insert them into new areas of the energy supply chain outside of the electric power sector. And one of the most critical, and hydrogen produced from renewable power is the most scalable and impactful way to do that. And Harris, I saw that reflected in your presentation as the source of energy. So one question, I'll throw both of them out there. One question is, does wind and solar as the source power enable or cause a challenge for the growth of hydrogen in the scale of facilities like yours, Robert? Is there any part of that being the source power that is either a barrier or a particular opportunity? I'd just love to hear a little bit more about how to connect those two, because I thought that was a compelling comment and a compelling piece of your presentation, Harris. And the second question I have is also stemming from Sheldon's thoughts, which is green hydrogen goes beyond power, and it has the potential to decarbonize very energy intensive, hard to electrify sectors such as aviation, steel, cement making, agriculture, shipping, these really energy intensive spaces. So we're both talking about how do we get biomass out, looking at the avoided cost, Jim, to your point, to lives, to communities, to emissions in the air, wildfire, but also how do we use it in such a way that it is offsetting these really energy intensive sectors. So I think my question is really around hearing your perspectives on the dual opportunity there and just a little bit more color. And that's my sort of kindergarten question for you.
Yeah, I'll try to answer the first part of your question about the wind and solar. So we know that wind and solar, they have made a lot of progress over the past few decades. And in terms of hydrogen production, a lot of people think that wind and solar and, particularly electrolysis is going to play a bigger role in moving towards bigger hydrogen economy. But we also know that wind and solar are not available everywhere. So there are limitations to those technologies. And also in terms of efficiencies, what we have seen is that if you produce hydrogen from wind and solar, it costs much more compared to woody biomass through gasification. And it's not going to be able to compete with SMR process. So I think biomass, what we see is complementary to wind and solar. We don't see it as kind of wind and solar as a barrier, but biomass can complement in areas where you don't have wind and solar available, and that's where you could utilize biomass to produce hydrogen.
One other element I might want to comment on is where there's a symbiotic relationship with wind and solar as compared to hydrogen, is that hydrogen is not only a fuel, it's also a battery, wind and solar or not. So that there's some specific applications that's advantageous to. I'm sure Harris has thought about this a lot, and but it very much has its own window of opportunity as a standalone fuel.
Tim Olson again. I wanted to add another thing. I've seen projects in Europe, Denmark, Germany, Switzerland, and Sweden, visited projects that combine the electrolysis of overgeneration of wind power primarily with the methanation, a different kind of process than Bob's project, which is referred to as a power to gas system. And the output, it's an ability to capture carbon, but also in conjunction with typically biogas, but could be woody biomass too, and basically is inserted into the plumbing, the gas plumbing system in Europe, and these are megawatt scale projects. So it is possible to do that. So it's not really a competitor, and the output could be renewable natural gas or hydrogen or both, and it's not competitive with wind power or solar. It's really taking advantage when there's an overgeneration, or when you co-locate a renewable electricity project with a fuel production project. More complex, more expensive, but do we have any of those projects in the United States? No, we don't, but they do exist in Europe.
Well, Tim, that's because they're not taking into account in this country, in this state versus Europe. Jim Hauptmann's very point.
Yes.
That we tried to make in the biomass and bioenergy reports of the years 2000 through 2010, that the avoided costs that he mentions far exceed the small subsidies that might have to be given to make some of these other features, particularly the forest biomass. The avoided costs easily would pay these additional costs and still leave a net positive for society if you could do it. But historically, you can't generate in column A all these savings to move them over to subsidize in column B, and thus it's not been politically attractive when there's so many other allegedly attractive things to spend money on in the near term. But if we can get there before burning down too many forests, we can come up with where we're trying to go as a healthy forest, avoided costs of fire, greater water yield, all these things that there are numerical values for, but no way to turn it, to monetize them. And that's about where things were about the years 2010, 2012. There were supposed to be economic studies done on that. I won't get into what happened to them. And here we stand again trying to move this along. Now, it's looking more attractive because, look at the $526 million the governor just set aside. But so much of that is to prepare for fires, not to prepare to avoid fires. And that's the dilemma we have. So I just hope the Butte thing really works, because it might be a pilot project. But you throw in some benefits, Jim, and that is low land, level land, easy to get at for those people. At least you'll avoid some fires. Those of us dealing in the high Sierra, where it's really tough, and you've dealt there too, we will continue to have problems. And it's true. Biomass to electricity, the original renewable electricity in California, back in the 70s, let's just say, it isn't very attractive anymore based on all these other technologies. But we've got to figure out some more ways. So we need more of these salons.
There's some lessons we can learn from Europe that
Right.
combine more holistic systems.
The political will's been there for a long time, and like you said, the circular argument of the benefits versus offset the cost of the government initiated investments. We just have California for a long time was the only place doing that here in the United States at all, and so it's nice to be here. Let's get the fires fixed. Jim's done, like I said, Jim's really gotten realistic about what it's. He's done it very, very well, and it's the first time I've heard where you have an ever more organizing way to collect the forest material. But like you said, get 100 feet off the road and the game changes a bit, and it's something that has to be worked out.
Thank you so much. And I feel like I say this, once a month, or someone here does, which, humans are terrible historically at placing a value on avoided disaster. And we do it in almost every aspect of our lives, and human behavioral scientists talk about it. And so it's such a frustrating challenge to place into codified policy. I know that I am preaching to the choir. So we're only going to spend a short amount of time still together, but we're actually going to do it in smaller groups. And we're going to have an opportunity, ideally, to hear one another's voices a little bit more. I'm going to drop some prompts here into the chat. And let me just look quickly at Zach's comment. Yes, excellent. We will talk about that. Thank you. These prompts that I'm dropping here into the chat are those that we'll talk about in our breakout groups. We'll only be there for a short amount of time, 12 to 15 minutes, and then we'll come back together. So let's hear a few more voices, and then we'll have a little more opportunity together after that. You'll see an invitation come up to a breakout room, and you can just accept that invite. Hello, welcome back. I know there are a few fewer of us now, but all we're going to do right now is actually something very quick. We're going to go around and have the folks that facilitated those rooms and those discussions, and I got texts, so I know they were good, or at least interesting. Share one or two things that you thought were compelling from your discussion. And at the same time that we do that, I'd invite everyone to open up your chat. And if you could just drop in there something you heard from someone else that you thought was compelling. It doesn't have to be groundbreaking. It doesn't have to be earth-shattering, but something you heard today from someone else or in your discussion that you thought was interesting. And that'll be our sort of rolling credits for the end of our conversation together, if you just drop those into the chat. And at the same time, Robert, you have a good, curious look on your face, so I'm going to go to you first. If you could just share a couple takeaways. Robert Suarez.
Oh, well, we cut off when we were coming back. Me and Spoon and Zach were with Robert, and he was going through the whole, the elegant model that I think will emerge as the EPA's budget comes back together, and there's just potential funding for this type of work is there, and fleets need it. So I think just the discovery that there's a lot of opportunity for this in various areas, and I guess the one challenge that we highlighted was something very common to Tahoe. If it's not broken, don't fix it. Zach was mentioning that Liberty Utilities, as an example, were going to revamp their fleet. Would it be great to do that with hydrogen? But they're likely just to revamp their fleet with what it was before, because that kind of worked before. So that's a sociocultural thing that I think as a region we could probably get over, or we need to. But we also had Robert in, so it's like, there's nothing that that we spoke about this whole time that he didn't know. So we're just kind of picking his brain for opportunities.
Awesome. Thank you. And I know I'm the only one dropping things in the chat, so maybe you heard nothing compelling. But if you did, I'm going to ask that again. Kristen, how about you?
Sure. Well, I was surprised to find out that there are almost 100 hydrogen refueling stations in the state. We talked a lot about just the distribution network and the practicality of getting hydrogen into the market and where the best applicability is. Also, I love this this phrase that hydrogen is the Swiss Army knife of decarbonization. That was a good one. We had some optimists and some skeptics in our group. So I thought that was pretty interesting. And a lot of theme around opportunity, but this is a very long runway. Like anything, we didn't replace the horse overnight. We're not going to replace petrochemicals overnight either. So.
Thank you. And it's interesting, actually, because I think all of our conversations were pretty different. Two things that I took away from our conversation were the realization, which was new to some, that smaller scale hydrogen is possible. Creating hydrogen from woody biomass doesn't just mean some huge centralized facility in the Central Valley, but it can actually be done in the way that Robert and Jim have described to us today. And then another thing I thought was interesting was sort of the recognition that any of these things we want to do with woody biomass, the stuff we want to do with it that gives it a better fate than open burn and wildfire, all those new technologies require knowing there is a demand for them. And hydrogen, being the Swiss Army knife, has the opportunity to plug into so many different places that it can replace current things. It's like a direct plug and play for a lot of different things, and therefore that makes it a particularly compelling opportunity. And I thought that was an interesting piece of our discussion as well. So thank you all very much. Thank you, Robert. Thank you, Harris. I'm so grateful for your time today and for sharing with us your knowledge about hydrogen, the results of your analysis and your work, and the incredible work your, exciting new startup is pulling together, Robert. So thank you all for being here. And Kristen, if you want to close us out on behalf of that foundation. You're muted.
Dang it.
Your brilliance will never be heard.
I would just like to thank everyone for coming, and for those of you who continue to join these salons. It's very important. As Jim said, we need more of them. We need more people at the table. There's a lot going on in the world, and it's the Community Foundation. As I mentioned in the beginning, our vision is to convene smart people and really try to collaborate on big solutions. So thank you so much. And we do not have the next one scheduled, but you will be certain to hear when we do.
Thank you. Yes, this was part of our Making Markets series. So the next will either be in the Stories of Our Forests or the Regional Solutions Regional Management series. So we got a lot of cool stuff in the works around a possible film screening on the horizon. Different take altogether. Thank you.
Thank you, Teal.
Robert, thank you so much for facilitating. He left already. Other Robert, thank you for being here.